So I'm Becky Ryder. I am the clinical director of Eden's Counseling Group. I am a trauma specialist, which means I've just been through a whole bunch of trainings, EMDR, the neuroaffective relational model. I'm a somatic experiencing practitioner. So trauma is my jam. I really enjoy working with trauma, and I'm excited to share what I know about developmental trauma, relational trauma with you tonight, because it does have an impact in so many ways, especially in your relationships. So hopefully this will give you some information about, you know, how it may look for you, how it may show up for you, as well as, you know, ways to cope, things to do about it, because it doesn't mean just because you have developmental relational trauma doesn't mean like, oh, I'm going to be feeling like this for forever, or struggling with relationships forever. But it does have, you know, what happened in childhood does have an impact on you as an adult. So let's get started. Oh, I hope shoot. Okay, well, fun times. So, okay, let me describe this experiment, and hopefully you will go and find it on YouTube at some point. So Dr. Edward Tronick did what's called the still face experiment to show, again, just how we relate as humans and how important that is. So he took a baby and his mother and had, you know, the mother fully engaged with the baby, you know, responding, smiling, talking, you know, the baby's giggling and laughing. And then he did another video where the mother had no expression, you know, just a still face. And you see the baby trying to engage and get mom to interact. And, you know, mom's just, you know, staring with a still face at the baby. Well, as this kind of goes on a little bit, the baby gets upset. You know, mom's not connecting with me and it's painful and I don't know why. And, you know, so the baby gets upset and starts crying, and, you know, obviously then the mother comforts the child. And so that experiment really shows how our relationships with our primary caregivers can impact us further in life. And impact children, and how, you know, that baby was doing everything he could to connect with his mother. It was, let me laugh and smile. Oh, that didn't work. Let me, you know, then I'm going to start crying and I'm upset. And, you know, maybe then I will get this connection I need with my mother. And I say connection because oftentimes I think especially when someone has a view of what someone might be doing as bad behavior, they make an assumption, oh, they just want attention. I would wonder, do they really want attention, or is it really connection that they're looking for? And so if I can get my next slide to go forward. So and kind of what I'm talking, the framework that I'm speaking of, because so many people have heard about, you know, there's so many different things out there about developmental trauma, trauma in general, relational trauma. I think looking at it, you know, they've heard about attachment. More people have heard about attachment, but not necessarily have connected it to developmental relational trauma. So the training I'm in, and if you saw on my slide, I'm a NARM therapist in training. So that's the neuroaffective relational model, is NARM. And so it is a model that is for developmental trauma and complex PTSD. And it's interesting, you know, the premise of it, because the original book that Lawrence Heller, who's one of the creators, put out, is called Healing Developmental Trauma. He was originally going to call it Connection, Our Deepest Desire and Greatest Fear, because that is what attachment developmental trauma, relational trauma, that is what we are trying to do because we are wired for connection as humans. And so we so want it, and at the expense of ourselves so many times, to stay connected to the other people. And then we also, unfortunately, because we desire that connection so much, then we also fear it, because when that connection is not reciprocated, it's so incredibly painful. And so the premise of this model, and again, I'm not going to go too into detail about it, but I want to give you an idea of, you know, where this knowledge that I have that I'm sharing with you tonight, where it's coming from, if in case you wanted to do more research or, you know, kind of look it up and learn a little bit about it. But this model is very much about connection with others and connection with self. And so not only, you know, when we think of, and I have another slide coming up about kind of their view of attachment, you know, the connection goes multiple ways. And so with this model, they have, you know, they talk about connection, they talk about protective strategies. So you'll hear me, you know, talk a little bit about the things that we do sometimes that can be detrimental in relationships are really just a protective strategy so that we can stay either connected with the person we love or stay connected to ourselves. And I'll talk a little bit about that coming up, but I really want to kind of differentiate, because so many people hear, you know, when they hear trauma, or anytime I tell someone like, oh, okay, it sounds like you have some trauma, they're like, well, I mean, I haven't been to war, I haven't been, you know, had horrible accidents, or haven't had horrible things happen to me. So there are really 3 types of trauma, but 2 main types I'm going to talk about. And so shock trauma, which again, until I did training in somatic experiencing and the neuroaffective relational model, I hadn't really heard, you know, the term shock trauma. So shock trauma is when we feel we have a mortal threat. So that is going to be some of that, you know, what some people call the big T trauma of, you know, assault, a major car accident, being in the military, you know, big things that impact your physical body. And so you're more likely, when you have that mortal threat, to have fear. So then, okay, if you're driving in a car, oh gosh, like you feel so much anxiety because I just had this horrible car accident and I keep looking around, and what if, you know, what if somebody hits me, and oh my gosh, and, you know, so there's this fear of your life because your life had been threatened. What's different with developmental trauma is you don't fear for your physical body. You might, especially again, like the challenges sometimes when we kind of differentiate is within developmental trauma, yes, there can be physical abuse. So you can have both. When you have both shock trauma and developmental trauma, that's complex PTSD. So, but kind of thinking about developmental trauma, if we take the physical part out of it, there's no mortal threat, but it feels, you know, people joke when they have a baby and they're trying to go feed the baby and the baby starts shrieking and acting like, oh, it acts like it's never been fed. Well, it doesn't know yet that it's going to be fed. And so it's very different. You know, the baby is fearing for its life. So it is very much a mortal threat. Again, not saying that, you know, not feeding your child like right at the moment they need to be fed is a shock trauma, but that's just kind of how I differentiate, you know, those pieces a little bit. So with developmental trauma, that's a threat to the sense of who you are. So when I talk about connection with self, that's what I'm talking about, is this piece of I am connected to myself. I can recognize my own needs. I feel comfortable setting boundaries because that's what I need for myself. And so what happens in this developmental trauma, this threat to this sense of self, is when shame comes up. So, for instance, oh gosh, like you're always doing things last minute. And then the child creates meaning about what that says about them. Like, oh gosh, like I must, be a horrible person because I can never be on time. Again, that's a bit extreme, but our emotions are extreme. And so then they're because they feel that shame of, oh my gosh, there's something wrong with me because I can't be on time. It creates this response of that anxiety. So there's a difference in between, shock trauma, we call that fear. And then in developmental trauma, because it's that shame coming up and that threat to this, who you believe you are, is more so the response might be anxiety. Again, that's not the only response. I'm trying to I recognize I only have 45 minutes or 50 minutes. So I'm trying to simplify it as much as I can. So if I need to clarify anything, please definitely, put that in the chat box, because I can't go as deep as I might like. So like I was saying before, most people are familiar with attachment, and they might say, oh, I have attachment issues. And so, but this model is a little bit different when it comes to attachment, because what I have found with a lot of my clients is when I talk about attachment, and if you're not familiar with what I'm talking about, you can either be what they call securely attached, anxious attachment, avoidant attachment, again, depending on the model, ambivalent attachment, so there's this belief that, okay, we need to be moving towards secure attachment. I have found that brings up a lot of shame for someone when they recognize that, like, oh, okay, I'm anxiously attached, and that's not, again, they kind of tell themselves like, okay, so that's not how I should be. I need to have secure attachment, and they feel a lot of shame around their attachment style. And so what I like about, let me skip ahead. What I like about NARM is it has a different view on attachment and secure attachment. So, and this is, again, a little bit more detail, but I wanted to kind of show how these things relate. So with NARM, it has, the different survival styles he comes up with, where you've got the different attachment styles. Lawrence Heller kind of transitioned that into what he called survival styles. So he's got 5 different survival styles: connection, attunement, trust, autonomy, and love and sexuality. So what happens, and again, where you have the secure attachment, is when you have your core needs being met, you have an attuned environment, and you have capacity for those 5 different survival styles: the connection, the attunement, trust, autonomy, and love and sexuality. The way that shifts in terms of developmental trauma is you've got your core needs, primary emotions, and then something happens within the attachment relationship. We call it environmental failure, which then leads this disconnection, typically to themselves, because it's like, I cannot, okay, so if mom is upset with me that I'm running late all the time, then I'm going to start ignoring the fact that I need to run to the restroom right before we leave for school, and I'm going to focus on what mom needs, and so to make mom happy, because I don't want to lose this connection that I have with my mother. Again, I'm using mother, but it could be any primary caregiver. And so then that becomes where they've compromised, it becomes compromised of these capacities that they have. Okay, it doesn't feel safe to maybe connect with myself and connect with the needs that I have. And so then, someone might become a people pleaser, A lot of people talk about, I hear a lot of clients say that, like, oh, I'm definitely a people pleaser. And so what they're doing is that shows up as a protective strategy of, I'm going to please this person in my life that I care about, potentially it may be a partner, or even, as growing up, a parent, a caregiver, at the expense of what I need for myself. So this is just kind of, again, shows how that happens. I am not someone who says, parents are the whole reason why someone has developmental trauma. I'm not saying this to blame parents or to, have anyone kind of, go, oh my gosh, I have a child, like, what am I doing wrong? It's more of just an awareness of how this happens. And if we know how it shows up, then that gives us more choice in how we want to have our needs met. Once we have this awareness and we acknowledge what it is that we're doing and why we're doing it. So let me go back to this model kind of developed from the ACEs study, the adverse childhood events. So a lot of times if someone's ever, wondering, oh, how would I have developmental trauma? We've found that a lot of it comes from, these areas, these main areas of trauma, but also, so, and these are the big ones that we think about. Like, not everyone that I would say has developmental trauma has all of these adverse childhood events. They might not have any of these. Again, these are the things that we think about when we think about big trauma. What they could, they could definitely have some of these things. And again, that depends on, that can create some mental illness in the future, and again, create some other concerns. But most of the time, what we've kind of experienced in terms of the neuroaffective relational model is what we call environmental failure. So, which can happen and all the time. Like, an environmental failure doesn't mean, you did one of, it's one of these 10 things. Environmental failure can be a misattunement. So for instance, I have clients coming in saying, I've always been told I'm too sensitive, and maybe that, that child felt a lot of emotions and the parent was really uncomfortable with emotions. And so maybe they, every time the child got upset, maybe it was, oh, boys don't cry. I think that happens. I think, unfortunately, men get that so much of, men don't cry, boys don't cry, or you're being too sensitive, because they just don't understand how to manage what the child might be needing in that moment. So, again, not to say, again, I'm not putting blame on anyone. It's just, it happens. And especially in our busy lives, it may be, and trauma gets passed down really through the generations. So if your parent never connected with you emotionally and didn't know how and weren't able to, then how can you expect yourself to know that as well? And so, we're talking about, chronic misattunement, that the focus is really on attachment, has always been on that attachment disruption, and like, how can I get to secure attachment, when really developmental trauma, when we're trying to recover from it, we're focused on systemic dysregulation, the identity distortions, like, the shame, the self-hatred, the guilt, the things that have interrupted capacity to connect with others and self and their own sense of aliveness. And so it's not saying, like, in typical attachment, the attachment models, it's, oh, okay, you need to, move into secure attachment. Well, okay, that's great, but I'm anxious for a reason. I avoid things for a reason. And so and so it's really looking that, instead of looking at this as something that someone does to potentially harm someone else, or, oh, okay, he's just being avoidant because he doesn't want to talk about our relationship. If you look at it from more of a strength-based perspective of, this person has developed a protective strategy to maintain attachment, it makes a lot more sense, I think. And I'm going to go into that. So my now what, because like I've told you, okay, here's how it happens, here's how it shows up. Okay, great, I'm an adult and I'm struggling in my relationships. Now what do I do about it? And so, oh, and I had a great question. So is it possible to experience the traumas listed from a sibling in the household and family instead of a parent? Yes. And so that can absolutely happen, because, and it's all connected. So you may have this wonderful parent and, an abusive sibling or family member in the household. And so, but again, there was some need not being met. The parent may have had no idea that there was anything that was happening. And if and really, they can only do so much sometimes. And so sometimes, yes, the trauma can develop because of a sibling, because, they're so close and the parents aren't able to protect you when they don't know they need to protect you. Or maybe they're unable or incapable of doing so. And so a lot of these things, because siblings are so close, so there's, again, some environmental failure essentially happening where the parents don't know to protect or to even talk about it. So, and when I say now what, I don't want anybody being like, oh gosh, it's all parents' faults, or, I don't want anyone being like, oh my gosh, I need to pay, more attention to what's happening. It's not the experience or the event that causes the trauma. It's what happens afterward that causes the trauma. So if there is no relational repair that happens, then that's where some of these protective strategies come into play of like, okay, so, my sibling is constantly bullying me and I'm scared to, tell my parent because, the sibling has threatened me. So again, the parent doesn't know what they don't know. And so because this perpetuates, you develop this protective space of, maybe you get really angry and yell, or maybe you're very sensitive and I hate to call it sensitive, but maybe, you're more likely to have an emotional response where if someone, in your life now as an adult makes you feel how the sibling made you feel, and you just burst into tears. And so these are strategies to protect yourself and to feel those emotions in a way that keeps you safe. Because again, if you have an abusive sibling, that maybe the only way to get them to stop was to start crying. And so when you notice that strategy, the first few times you utilize it, then you develop this protective strategy so that anytime you get into conflict with someone, you start crying, because that's how your body has learned to protect itself, to not risk this disconnection from your primary caregiver. So, okay, so how this shows up in relationships, there's so many different ways. So like that was just a small example of every time my partner and I get in an argument, I just start crying. And so many people get so frustrated because they're like, why am I crying? Like, I'm not sad. But that again is how they were able to manage their emotions at that time, because there's been no communication, no repair that happened. It'd be different if in the instance of the abusive sibling, if then, say mom found out and was like, whoa, like this is not okay. We need to work this out as a family, and focused on how to create some repair between the siblings rather than, oh, sorry, this isn't my problem, or, oh, that's just what siblings do. Again, like sometimes parents don't know what they don't know. And so, and again, that's not to say that repair can't happen. So even if you have your own child and you're having a bad day, you get really frustrated and you yell at them. It's not the yelling that's going to be the thing that really impacts the child. It's the lack of repair after the fact, because they're going to be making all of their own assumptions about why this parent yelled at them. They don't know that mom was just having a bad day and, got irritated and just lost it. They don't know. Children don't know that they're a good child in, a bad environment. They don't recognize that, it's misattunement. So then they start creating these meanings about themselves. And so it's like, oh gosh, I can't reach out to mom or talk to mom about this particular issue because she might yell at me. And so, but if after the fact, even the next day, if that person were to go up to their child and say, look, I'm so sorry. I yelled at you yesterday. It was not your fault. You didn't do anything wrong. It wasn't about you. Mommy was just having a really bad day. And I'm sorry I took it out on you. I'm sorry I yelled at you. I'm going to try not to do that in the future. And, and be able to like talk that out with the child, or allow the child to have that repair of, oh, it wasn't about me. Okay, great. And they don't hold on to that. So then that protective strategy of, oh gosh, I can't talk to mom, doesn't perpetuate and doesn't come into the present. So the way this shows up as, adults, again, so many different ways it can show up. I think I'm going to pick on like people pleasing. So someone has learned over time that, oh, well, if I do whatever they want, like they smile at me, they're happy, they want to spend time with me. Like that's where a lot of people kind of get into the place of, oh, I can never say no, because, maybe the times that they did say no, it was like met with disappointment. And that feels worse to disappoint others than it does to disappoint themselves. And, that's how we do like, oh gosh, I don't want to do this, but I said yes, and I really shouldn't have. And, because the disappointment they might face, the potential loss of connection makes them, do the people pleasing instead of saying no. And then the resentment comes, and, they start feeling, oh gosh, I said, they're always asking me to like help them with this, and they never help me. And they're so focused on pleasing other people that they don't necessarily think about like what they need. And so that's kind of how it becomes that disconnection of self in terms of people pleasing, to focus on the connection with the attachment partner, like a husband or a wife, and, to at the expense of themselves. So then that creates, some resentment and they may act out, or, a way they might act out is, they get to a point where, oh, I've said yes all the time, and I don't want to do this, or like you're always asking me to do these things for you, when again, the partner had no idea that they were asking for things from that person all the time, or that person didn't want to do it, or didn't, was resentful of being asked to do the dishes, for example. That's just something small. So even small things can show up in a big way in relationship. I hear that a lot of like, I just asked them to do the dishes and they yelled at me or got upset, or they come in saying, gosh, like I'm constantly doing everything for my partner, or I'm really struggling with boundaries. And so how, again, when this shows up in your relationships, it can be really challenging, because all you can focus on sometimes is like, oh, I can't believe they yelled at me. Like, that really hurts. That's really painful. You get into arguments, and and so if you think about it with some curiosity, like, okay, we all know this isn't about the dishwasher. We know it's not that the dishwasher wasn't done. That may be one very small piece of it. And so approaching it with curiosity rather than making a judgment or assumption. It could be, I hear a lot from, oh, my partner's just lazy. They don't want to do anything, and I'm stuck doing all the housework. When, okay, can we have some curiosity about why it may be that you're doing all the housework and they're not doing any of it? Is it, is it because they're lazy? We don't know. Is it, it could be so many different things, but I think we're so quick to make meaning based on experiences in the past where we've been hurt, and we carry these beliefs forward in our lives. And so, it becomes, we're like, well, it's always about, I'm constantly the people pleaser. It's always about the other person and never about me, when really you learned that to keep connection with my primary caregiver, or whoever I wanted to keep connection with at that time, meant that I had to not take care of myself. I'm not able to sit and not do the dishwasher. It has to be done. When really, like, yeah, I really want to just sit down, and I don't feel safe asking my partner to do this for me. Or I have asked them multiple times and it ends up becoming an argument. And so again, if you really approach some of these conflicts with a lot of curiosity and these judgments, like, okay, wait, I'm making the judgment that if, I sit down and rest, that's going to mean I'm lazy. Is that really true? We don't know. I mean, again, my thought is like, no, there's no such thing as laziness. You're listening to your body and like allowing your body to have the rest that it needs. But it's where we really get into a lot of trouble is the loss of the curiosity about the beliefs we have about ourselves and the beliefs that we have about others in our lives. And so if we can take some space, which I know is difficult when your emotions are involved and you get upset and you're hurt, that's what happens. But these things don't need to happen in the moment. Again, I want to reiterate, repair, repair, repair. So you get in a big fight with your partner. Okay, let's come back when we're less emotionally activated and try to check in on what happened in the situation. Check in with our partner, check in with ourselves. What was really coming up for me? Do I really believe that my partner is lazy or that I'm lazy? well, no, like the house gets taken care of. Like we both had really long work days. You know, sometimes we just want to relax and not worry about the dishes. And so really paying attention to how something is showing up and why, because, and I don't like to say why because sometimes we don't know why, but having some curiosity about what's coming up around this issue, instead of, again, going to making an assumption about somebody's character or about yourself. Like, well, if they, I think something I hear a lot about is like, well, if they really loved me, they would try harder in the relationship. And a lot of, you know, most of the time, it has nothing to do with you and whatever is going on with the other person. And so again, when we make meaning that doesn't exist, you know, even with things people say, you know, unless they say directly to you, I hate you and I wish, you know, again, they can say horrible things sometimes, you know, but again, unless they really say like, I don't love you. Okay, they're telling you they don't love you. So chances are they don't, but so many people put on someone, oh, well, they would do these things. They would, you know, I wouldn't have to ask them to do the dishes if they really loved me. I wouldn't have to, you know, beg to go out to dinner. You know, that's assuming your partner is a mind reader as well. And so we put a lot of meaning on these things that if you were to ask your partner and say, you know, hey, do you not take me out to dinner because you don't love me? They would probably be like, what? What are you talking about? Like, you know, so the things that we really connect for ourselves and have some curiosity about, you know, again, is so incredibly important in relationship. Because, and I think what happens too in relationships, especially if you've been in a relationship with someone for a really long time, it becomes like, oh, well, you know, I know what they would say. You know, I know how they might respond. Okay, but how have you responded in the past? Or how have you, you know, presented what you're asking to them? You know, and so you're making these assumptions whereas if you maybe went at a different way or phrased it in a different way or just asked a question, it could be incredibly different. So I'm trying to think of an example. So, and a good example could be like you and your partner are out to dinner and, you know, someone, a friend of yours, a mutual friend stops by, you all start chatting and, you know, you notice like, huh, this friend sure is touching my partner's arm a lot. I wonder what that's about. And a lot of the times it's, oh, well, my partner must really like them. Or, you know, maybe they find them more attractive than they find me. And so, and then they get upset and they're like, you were flirting, and, you know, start accusing them of all these things that they didn't really do. Like the other person put their hand on their partner's arm. The partner wasn't grabbing their hand or, you know, anything like that. And so they get upset and get hurt and start to feel jealous and get worried that, oh my gosh, like, you don't love me, you're going to leave me, which feels so much worse in my mind than if you said, hey, you know, I noticed so-and-so was touching you a lot. How did you feel about that? You know, they may be like, oh, I just, you know, they seem like a touchy kind of person. You know, it's usually like that. Like, you know, and then respond, you know, they might say, well, why are you worried about that? Because again, if you, I know it can be incredibly vulnerable at times to even have some curiosity like that. But again, if you're coming at your partner in a non-accusatory way of just like, huh, I noticed they were touching you a lot. Like, what was that like for you? That's engaging their curiosity rather than, I can't believe you were, they kept touching you like that all the time. Well, then, depending on the person, I'm generalizing a lot right now. They're more likely to be like, to become defensive and like, what's going on with you? Like, what? That was nothing. I can't believe, you thought that was anything. Like, what are you thinking? And then it becomes an argument, and, and versus, oh, yeah, I guess they were touching my arm a lot. I mean, it's kind of weird. It didn't really bother me. I think it was okay. And, I don't really know them that well. So, hopefully they don't do it again. Or, again, it starts it starts more of a conversation that you might have with an opportunity for vulnerability and connection on both sides. Because again, if our goal is to connect with our partner, or, again, I'm using that as an example, making an assumption and creating meaning that doesn't exist makes everyone unhappy. Granted, again, I recognize that, that is a very deactivated, you're not emotionally activated to be able to respond that way. I know that's a very simplistic, potentially unrealistic way of response, but that doesn't have to happen in the moment. It can be much more about like, so you go off and you get upset and you yell at them and it becomes an argument. You can still go back. You should still go back and say, look, I just felt really uncomfortable with how they were touching you. It brought up some things for me. I recognize that you didn't ask them to touch you. And so I'm curious, what your experience was like. And so, and I got a good question of, if your partner is unfamiliar with touching with underlying intent, how can we better express our discomfort for that? So your partner may, again, could be completely oblivious and it's just like, oh, they were just touching my arm. Like, I don't think that they were interested or thinking anything, but like, it makes you uncomfortable to have someone touching them. I think that's something to really think about for yourself. Okay, I felt a lot of, they didn't really care or even notice, and I felt a lot of discomfort with that. And so being curious rather than, again, making an assumption or making meaning that, my partner wants to be with this other person, or even making the assumption that they were okay with the touching in the first place, because really you should never touch anybody without consent. But taking time also to think about, okay, what is coming up for me as I'm noticing this person touching my partner and I feel discomfort? Am I making, again, when we make meaning, there's not, and we have feelings, they're not always logical. So again, it may be, you may have made the meaning out of, oh, well, he's not pushing them away, so maybe he likes the touch, or maybe he's interested in this person, and you feel, threatened because, again, you're the threat of attachment loss, all the way from childhood. We're trying to maintain that connection with the people that we love and care about. And so that's a good opportunity for you to go, okay, is there a reason that, okay, so maybe it's fear of losing my partner, maybe they're, because they didn't push this other person away, maybe they're more interested in them. And so really paying attention to how that comes up for you and going and really being curious about like, okay, so I'm making the assumption that they're interested in this person or they enjoyed the touch when I have really no idea if they did or not. And so again, kind of approaching it with curiosity, like, you know, not in an accusatory way of like, well, why didn't you shove them away? But kind of going, hey, if you feel comfortable enough being vulnerable with your partner in this way of saying, you know, it was really uncomfortable for me when, you know, so-and-so kept touching you at dinner the other night. And I don't know what maybe I should have done in that moment. Like, you know, I'm not, again, kind of going at it with like, I'm not accusing you of anything. I just want to communicate and share my discomfort. And, you know, I was trying to think about, you know, what that was bringing up for me. You know, is this something we could talk about together? And to really understand, you know, how I was feeling in this moment and how, if this were to happen again in the future, you know, we could handle the situation. You know, and again, that a relationship is between two people. I'm not quite sure, you know, that how that may work out. Again, if your partner responds with some defensiveness, it's important to be thoughtful of, okay, if they're being defensive right now, does that mean they have something to defend because they were doing something wrong? Or do they feel attacked? You know, so again, really being curious rather than going, oh, they're defending themselves because they have something to defend themselves for, when really they could feel attacked in the moment. And, you know, again, we're humans, we're animals. When we feel attacked, we're going to defend and go into fight. And so, and also that fight can show up as a protest of like, you know, how dare you accuse me of something I didn't do? Again, if that's kind of how that's taken in. So again, if you and your partner have curiosity and really think about like, how is this feeling for us? How are we, you know, and not making assumptions around the experience, and having that curiosity of not assuming that they enjoyed it and just kind of being like, hey, what was that like for you? You know, and not assuming that they enjoyed it. And also paying attention to, what is this experience? And in this instance, what meaning am I making about that for myself? You know, am I saying like, gosh, like if he was okay with this, then he must not, you know, she must not love me, or they must not love me, and something's wrong, and I'm going to lose my partner, and then you go into panic. So again, if we could kind of slow it down a little bit and create some space with the curiosity, rather than going straight to, it means this, it means that, or, you know, they just don't love me, and I'm going to make this assumption that they're going to leave me. If we can kind of slow it down a little bit and approach it with like, okay, I can tell I am making these assumptions, I am making this meaning, but where is that coming from? Is that coming from the experience? Is that coming from something inside of me, something my partner has done? You know, can we really be curious about this together? And that not only will help your relationships, but that will help with how you relate to yourself so much. Because I recommend curiosity and not making assumptions, even in things that you believe about yourself, of, oh, well, you know, like the previous example of like, well, I don't want to do the dishes, so that means I'm lazy. Okay, that's a kind of a harsh judgment, and that makes me feel worse. You know, why do I want to do that to myself? Is this something I really believe? And if I do, why do I believe that? You know, because and that, again, that's a difficult thing to do, because some of these beliefs that we've had since we were very young, and they become, in our minds, they become fact when they're really not. Yeah, most of the time they're really not. They're just things that we have, have created, and it's a protective strategy that if I call myself lazy, well, then nobody else can call me lazy. I'm already, again, I hear so many clients say like, well, I'm harder on myself than anybody else. And that is, again, that's a strategy of like, well, then nobody else can use that against me or say those things to me. I'm already aware of it, I already know it. So again, if we really look at some of our actions and things that we do with more curiosity, it will shift how we feel about ourselves, how we feel in relationship, how we operate in our daily lives. So those are my top three. So I'm going to say again, curiosity, don't make assumptions if possible. Again, very difficult. And again, what meaning might you be making about either yourself or this other person in the situation? I'm trying to keep track of time, so we've got a few minutes left. I want to make sure that if I have more questions or if there was anything I needed to further clarify or a different example, yeah, please let me know. So please ask whatever might be on your mind. And I appreciate those that did ask questions already. It was very, very helpful and great to know like what you were needing. And I know some people are on their phones as well, so it can take a little bit to unmute, or unless, I don't know if or unless you put it in the chat. So, and also, so I'll hang out here a little bit in case somebody does have some questions that they want to put in the chat. Also, please remember to fill out the, at the top, we have the feedback form. So if you can fill that out, because again, I appreciate any feedback you might have. Like, I really want to, make sure that whatever I present is useful and, yeah, not boring. Oh, good. Glad to hear it was helpful. Thank you. And yeah, definitely, if you're interested in kind of learning more, I recommend now, like, NARM is a therapeutic model that you go to training for, but they do have a couple of books out. They came out with a most recent book. It is very much focused on clinicians, but it has some really good, what I really like about it is good questions, good ways to languaging. So sometimes we want to ask something or we want to be curious, but it's like, okay, how am I curious about that? Okay, great. So somebody has a question. So if we did not get a lot of affirmation or were heard and soothed as a child, how can, sorry, the chat moved. Soothed as a child, does this lead to wanting to be heard as an adult? So, okay, so, and it looks like this part of this question is saying like there's some discomfort with people who are silent or withdraw or don't want to talk about like how they might be feeling. So, I mean, yes, it's potentially, yes, this could be because it could be really uncomfortable for you because you didn't get affirmation. And again, like, this is something I joke about to a lot of clients. We are not taught about emotional health, how to respond to someone emotionally. So, you may not have gotten affirmation or soothing, again, because either, your parents may not have known how because they never got it. And so for you, it could feel like if someone is silent or withdraws or doesn't want to hear what you have to say, that can feel like a huge disconnection of, and it's like, I just want to feel heard. I want to feel, because again, if your parents never engaged you in, hey, what's going on? Like, you seem upset. And it was just like, hey, don't yell. Or, oh, you're crying again. Or you cried and nobody ever soothed you. It could be, you've kind of equated, again, this is making a bit of assumption on my part, but you've equated that silence with they don't like what I'm doing or what I'm saying or how I'm responding. And so they're creating this disconnection. And so if someone is silent or withdraws, it can create a lot of anxiety and like, oh my gosh, like they're gonna leave me, or they don't love me anymore, or they're unhappy with me. And so typically, yes, that again, I don't necessarily know why. There could be a number of reasons why that can be so upsetting. I think you're making a good assumption of what you didn't get in childhood that now creates this struggle for others. And so I think that's something to notice for yourself of, okay, like I'm feeling really scared because they're really withdrawing. And so then your behavior may be to kind of chase them, like, no, we got to talk, we got to talk, when the other person might need space because you're trying to soothe your anxiety of, oh my gosh, I might lose them. And so again, I'm kind of just going off a very, small question. So I hope that was helpful, but I think it's important to really notice, like, if you are struggling with their silence or their withdrawal, okay, what behaviors are coming up for you? What feelings are coming up for you? And how might you be responding in the situation? And maybe kind of think about like, okay, yes, I'm noticing the anxiety. I'm feeling really anxious. And I'm making these assumptions that they're upset with me and I'm going to, lose this relationship. Okay, like maybe if we kind of step back a little bit and kind of, okay, like let me give them some space, maybe 15, 20 minutes, and then try to re-engage. Or also, again, kind of say, hey, I understand if you need space. I'm feeling a little anxiety because we're not talking about this, but is that something that, maybe after a little bit of time, we could kind of go back to this? Because again, there could be any number of reasons with that. But I think it's important to really notice and pay attention to what's coming up for you when that happens. And then, okay, how can I connect with myself in this situation? Because again, they may not want to repair in that moment or at all. And so, and you can't really force anybody to do that. So then kind of being curious of what's coming up for me around this, and then what can I do for myself in this situation to maybe manage some of that anxiety that could be coming up. Maybe it is reaching out and connecting with somebody else. Maybe it's, writing about like what happened and trying to, kind of look at it from a place where you have less emotional activation, maybe later on, because that does, make a difference. And so let's see. So then I have another question. So let's see, how to explain attachment to a partner who isn't used to consistent trauma, and how to help them understand that you're not controlling, jealous, or insecure about what they have in their world in contrast to what you don't have in your world. Very independent, don't rely on the partner, but it's struggle. Oh, so there's a struggle with abandonment and betrayal, and they perceive it as controlling. So in that case, let me think about that for a moment. Okay, so here's the thing. this is going to be a little bit different. You know, because I hear like, how do I help them understand that I'm not controlling, jealous, or insecure? So if somebody said that to me in session, I would ask them like, okay, well, what would it say about you if you were? Because, you know, again, you're getting this maybe that your partner is saying these things to you and you're going, I'm not any of those things, because you have this meaning that you've created about someone who is those things, versus, again, kind of stopping and thinking and going, okay, what am I doing that looks like I'm trying to be controlling or jealous or insecure? Like, what does that my part, you know, what might I be doing or creating in this situation with my partner that they're viewing me as that way, that I have to so quickly be like, no, that's not a thing? Because, you know, there could be so many meanings, like, you know, okay, if someone's controlling, jealous, or insecure, like, gosh, like, how can they be a good partner when that's not the case? Like, if you are feeling some anxiety in your relationship and they're kind of accusing you of those things, like, okay, definitely kind of sit back and think and like, okay, am I hurt because of what it means if I am these things? Or can I ask more questions? So like, also asking, you know, being curious with your partner of, okay, so you're telling me I'm being this way. What is that? When you say that, like, what are you meaning? Can you give me some examples? Or, you know, again, if you struggle with fear of abandonment, you know, giving an opportunity to tell them like, okay, this particular behavior that you do brings this up in me. And I notice I feel a lot of, because, you know, again, there's that struggle of, I never want to put someone's emotional responsibility, you know, no one is responsible for my emotions. But, you know, again, there could be ways to kind of mitigate maybe some triggering things that they're doing that bring this up in you. Like, you know, I texted you and you didn't text me back for like 5 hours. You know, can we talk about this and maybe do it a little bit differently, versus, I can't believe you didn't text me back for 5 hours, like, you know, and kind of being angry. And so, and also, again, being, if you feel comfortable, again, having some vulnerability about how you are feeling. Because again, if your partner's telling you like, you're these things, and you're saying, no, I'm not, they don't really know what's going on for you. And so again, trying to be curious together about what's happening is really important. So I hope that was helpful. With the bit of information that I had, was trying to kind of cover all my bases. But again, I think that's really something important to notice. If you're feeling so activated by what they might be saying about you, then that feels like an attack on your sense of who you are. And so really thinking about and being curious about, like, okay, well, I don't want to believe I'm these things, and we're not saying that you are, but what meaning am I making for myself if these things are true? And again, being really curious about, how could this show up? What am I? Because again, there's the meaning that you're making from these particular phrases that say something about you that you're responding to, because you're, you know, it's this attack on you and makes you feel bad, versus, okay, they're telling me this, you know, can I be curious about this? And can I kind of go into that curiosity with myself and with my partner? So, okay. You're great. So, all right. Well, thank you everyone for coming. I hope it was helpful. Please remember to fill out the feedback form. I really love working with trauma, developmental trauma, relational stuff. So yeah, definitely let me know if I can support you. I love this work, and I really encourage you to, do further research. Again, the funny enough, the author, or one of the creators of NARM, is Lawrence Heller, who was married to Diane Poole Heller, who also does a lot of work in attachment. So I just find it humorous how kind of very similar things, but done and looked at very differently. And then also kind of funny that, they were married, and, and they've kind of branched off in multiple ways. So, all right. Thanks so much. And I hope everyone has a great evening.